There were 6 friends. One of them was sick.
It was a character that couldn't stand silence, so he would make jokes.
I'm not great at the advice. Can I interest you in a sarcastic comment? Some cheese.
I'm a drug addict. I'm a person that if I have a drink, I can't stop. And so it would be following your ideology that I'm choosing to do that. I'm choosing...
That's exactly not my ideology, it is my belief. Yes, you do choose.
Yeah, I'm gonna cry now.
And it takes us to a central question as we start this story. How does someone whose life is filled with so much luck and talent end up struggling so much?
I remember that day very well in Ottawa, Canada. I'd never drank before, and I just sort of drank this entire bottle. And I thought to myself, this must be the way that normal people feel all the time.
As sad as that is, Matthew Perry, like all addicts, is very good at hiding the sadness. And he specifically uses comedy to hide the sadness, walking that fine line very expertly.
I've had a very long, hard day. Mostly it was drinking. Yeah.
At the end of his memoir, Friends, Lovers, and the Big Terrible Thing, he uses pictures from his childhood and he captions them with like little jokes about alcohol and where it all started. How from the beginning he needed alcohol to soothe himself. But why would anyone need alcohol or any other substance to feel soothed? What is missing? As human beings, we are wired for connection, and when we're abandoned or neglected in childhood, those circuits in our brains just don't develop. Matthew's feelings of abandonment started very early on when his parents separated when he was 1 year old and his father left him in Canada and moved to LA.
His very young parents had separated before he was a year old. They lived on opposite coasts and started new families. He remembers when his dad marries a new wife.
At the end of his memoirs, he again uses those pictures with funny yet sad comments about how he felt. In one of them, he writes that he felt very confused why his dad is marrying someone else. And again, walking that fine line between comedy and tragedy. And actually, if you do a quick scan of his book using the word dad, searching for the word dad, in the first chapter alone, there's about 5 or 6 mentions, and all of them along the lines of, where the F is my dad, where's he gone, and without my dad. It's kind of heartbreaking, actually. And even though he had step-siblings with whom he had good relationship, that feeling of being unwanted never went away.
As he grew up, he felt a kind of loneliness, never sure he was good enough to belong.
And that is at the root of addiction. It's not the substances, it's the feelings that you're trying to numb using the substances. And Matthew Perry actually tried to numb those feelings with things other than just substances, like humor and fame and money, but clearly that wasn't enough. And speaking of addiction, joining me this week is Gabor Mate, an addiction specialist. And this is what I imagine Gabor would have told Matthew if they had met. Told him about how the brain of an addict works, how those circuits aren't developed.
The question is, what happens to people that they need these chemicals from the outside? When you don't have love and connection in your life, when you're very, very young, then those important brain circuits just don't develop properly. And their brains then are susceptible when they do the drugs. Now they feel normal, now they feel pain relief, now they feel love.
Yeah, that's definitely true.
Hey you guys, it's me in denial. Sorry for being late with the video this week, but with all that's going on in the world right now, and this is probably a good time as any to mention that I'm actually Palestinian. If you've come to my show, you would have heard that my mom is Lebanese, so that's half of me, but my dad was Palestinian. And watching the news and what's going on, to say it's heartbreaking is an understatement. Like there is, yeah, my heart is involved. I can't, and even looking away from the news fills me with so much shame that I feel like I need to keep getting updated, but it just deteriorates your mental health. And I'm not gonna go on for too long about this because I know this is not why you come to my channel, but you come for entertainment, right? And psychology and all of that, and that's great, and I'm happy to do that. But the person who creates that is a human being, so I have feelings, and this week I'm all over the place. And I wanted to actually do a video on Jada, right? I mentioned Jada Pinkett Smith, her memoir, but reading that was not it, as the kids say. It was not, with everything that's going on, I didn't want to talk about someone narcissistic and this, and I didn't want to put more negativity out in the world. And then I heard that Matthew Perry passed away, and I've always been a fan, and every time an addict dies, I'm like, oh my God, some part of me, because even though I've been sober a few years now, right? But I consider myself a sober addict because I get the thinking behind it, what draws you to substances. And every time someone famous in the spotlight, especially someone I grew up with, someone as light and humorous as Matthew Perry, it's like, oh my God, to think of the sadness that he was carrying with him. And the reason, actually, interestingly enough, I chose Gabor Mate this week, it all came like full circle, is Gabor Mate is one of those people who's speaking about the Palestinian issue very beautifully. And why I recommend listening to him is because he's actually a Jewish person, and there are many other people, I'm linking them below if you're interested to hear their voices on the topic. So, and before we go on with this video, I want to mention the poll that I took in my community page asking whether you guys would want me to make advice videos to questions from subscribers or longer documentary formats. And I have to say, more than 70% of you chose the documentary, which means more than 70% of you don't want to hear my advice. Fine, fine, fine. Be that way. You're never gonna hear my advice. No, girl, I'm kidding. I'm gonna do both, but the way going forward, I'm gonna do like one a month, an in-depth documentary. Well, first, let's try it. Let's see how it works. And I'm gonna try the advice stuff. So I'm gonna link my email here. If you wanna hear my advice on something, just let me know. Maybe no one cares, but I will give it to you anyway, whether you want it or not. No, I definitely, something in my gut really wants to explore these advice videos. So yeah, let's do it, girl. And I also want to mention my show, which starts this coming Wednesday, November 8th at Stacey Amstel. We have like, I think 7 or 8 more tickets for this show, but I'm gonna play it monthly. So links below as well to that. And finally, I want to thank a few subscribers who donated to my channel using the super thanks. Love you guys. I just want to mention their names. Hold on. Lauren B, Tanya Evans, Tiffany Mikkel, and Irina Kuznetsova, who actually tried to donate on several videos and ended up donating on all of them. Girl, what the hell? Thank you, girl. And now back to Matthew and the theme of addiction. And more importantly, why do people become addicted? Why are they drawn to substances? I remember years ago, I was in the park with my friend and I was like living in a fog of marijuana at that point. And my friend had another friend come over, someone I don't know. And it was like 10 or 11 in the morning. We were sitting in the park and we're playing with my friend's dog. And this guy comes over and I'm smoking one joint after the other. And this guy's like, oh, hello, like what's going on? It's like you're absent. I'm like, that is the point. Because that is what addiction is about escaping your mind, escaping the self. And I actually love how Gabor Mate defines addiction. It's any behavior you use to soothe the pain and give you relief, temporary relief, but in the long term causes harm. And you still can't give it up despite all the harm that it causes. Actually, in Matthew Perry's book, which is, by the way, one part is like this juicy celebrity memoir, but another part is like a harrowing description of someone headed towards self-destruction. It is chilling. In one part, he talks about being very high and driving a convertible Mustang across the desert and feeling so exhilarated and pumped. And he says, I remember thinking, if this doesn't kill me, I'm doing this again. And for anyone who's familiar with addiction themselves, or they know someone who's addicted, you know this kind of self-destructive nature. It's like a train wreck. You can't even stand in its way. You have to just sit back and either watch a train wreck or hopefully pray that someone will figure it out by themselves. Besides describing all the self-destructive behavior in the book, he also talks about all the efforts that he's done to help other addicts. Like at some point, actually, he opened this thing called Perry House, which is where he turned his own house into home for homeless alcoholics.
He even opened a sober living home, the Perry House, to help men transition from rehab into the real world.
If a stranger came up to me and said, I can't stop drinking. I can't stop drinking. Can you help me? I can say yes.
You know, sometimes when we can't fix ourselves, we rush to fix other people because we're scared to stop and look at what needs fixing within us. But Matthew Perry needed help himself more than anybody else. And his friends even knew, they even tried to support him. But sometimes you can't. You can't help someone that is really not ready to help themselves.
In nature, when a penguin is injured, the other penguins group around it and prop it up until it's better. This is what my co-stars on Friends did for me. It's the time I should have been the toast of the town. I was in a dark room meeting with nothing but drug dealers and completely alone.
And then, of course, pills started to enter into the mix.
55 Vicodin a day, which is where I was.
55?
Yeah.
How did you get 55 a day?
So I did all sorts of things. I had a bunch of doctors, fake migraines and all that stuff.
And at one point in the book, he tells the story about going to the open houses on Sundays and searching through the medicine cabinets in the bathrooms and stealing whatever pills were there. And of course, he would, count on the fact that he's Matthew Perry, this famous celebrity. No one even suspect that he would go in and steal these pills. Yeah, and again, addicts are so good at hiding the truth, but actually when you end up hiding all those secrets, you're hiding yourself from other people. And the only people you can connect with are other people who are hiding the secret. But you're just in the circle of other people who are lying to themselves.
Secrets kill you. Secrets kill people like me.
And speaking of all those secrets and this ability to put up a front, a facade, to convince other people that you're okay.
How did you get the courage to fight the addiction to Vicodin?
Well, you get into a place in your life where you're having a problem and you either lie down about it or step up to bat and take your swing, and that's what I did.
And in this old interview, he does this thing that is probably very recognizable for all addicts, which is you're not just lying to other people, you're lying to yourself. When you're trying to recover, you actually want to be someone who's able to recover. And you sell it so convincingly that you're, this is it, this is the last time. And you laugh at your old addicted self, but you're still in it. And the addicts who are best at putting up that facade and lying to themselves and other people are the functioning addicts who still can go to work every day and who actually go out of their way to help other people.
Lisa Kudrow says Matthew Perry was always the one trying to keep everyone else happy.
But the signs were always there. Even if you watch his journey on Friends throughout all the seasons, you see his weight fluctuating in a terrifying way. It's like almost he becomes a different person from season to season.
You call to mind the words of the great Egyptian novelist Naguib Mahfouz, who wrote, "Nothing records the effects of a sad life as graphically as the human body," because these people lose everything. They lose their health, they lose their wealth, they lose human relationship, and in the end, they often lose their lives.
And speaking of all this weight stuff with Matthew Perry, there's one clip from his interview with Diane Sawyer that he did a year before he died, when the memoir was released. And he's watching a clip of himself being that skinny, and and he starts crying about the person that he was. But I get the feeling that he's actually crying about who he still is, especially now that we know what happened.
I can't have children!
Seriously, where did you get the hat?
It's very hard to watch that. And it's me. And I remember that. And I didn't understand what was going on.
It's very interesting. In that clip, he jokes about not having children.
I can't have children!
And this is something that he mentions in the memoir a lot, even though he says it jokingly here on the show. But in the memoir, there's many instances where he talks about how the sound of children and their laughter is the best thing in the world, and that he always imagined that in his early 50s, he'd be married and having a lot of children around. Like, he really longed to have not just connection with a lover, but also have a family with children. So to understand someone like Matthew Perry, it's very important to understand that it was never about the alcohol or the drugs. Those were just symptoms.
Because it's a myth that drugs are addictive. Drugs are not by themselves addictive, because most people who try most drugs never become addicted. Just like food is not addictive, but to some people it is. Shopping is not addictive, but to some people it is. One way or another, they all soothe pain. And that's what the real question in addiction is, not why the addiction, but why the pain.
It was a combination of feeling like I wasn't enough, feeling like I was needy, feeling like I didn't matter.
What triggered me the most in Matthew Perry's book is how the addiction and its negative effects showed up for him in relationships, in love. How he always wanted to be in a loving relationship, but somehow he couldn't. And it's so crazy. It's like the fear of being alone keeps us alone. Don't you recognize that? It's crazy, like, because we're so worried that we're not good enough to be with someone, we end up actually being alone because we end up pushing people away.
I'd be in relationships that were going great with wonderful women, smart, funny, wonderful women. I got scared. I would get scared and break up with them because I was afraid that if they found out those three things about me, they would break up with me.
Chandler, if it really hurts that bad, you should just tell her. Look, for the first time in my life, I'm in a real relationship, okay? I'm not gonna screw that up by, telling the truth.
Yeah, Matthew Perry was always operating as if he's this loser guy who's not worthy of being with a woman. And it's so interesting how the writing team at Friends were writing those characters, Chandler included, based on the actors, based on their insecurities and their personality traits. And actually they based Chandler on his anxiety and insecurity around women.
In the middle of that summer, they took us all separately to lunch and said, tell us about you. And I said, well, I'm not an ugly guy, but I have a lot of trouble with women. And that's what Chandler became.
Oh, no, don't go. I've scared you. I've said too much. I'm hopeless and awkward and desperate for love.
And speaking of this character mirroring the real person as in Chandler and Matthew, it's interesting, like great acting is about the search of the truth within yourself, not just the character. And there's this one acting coach whose interview I heard over 10 years ago. His name is Larry Moss and he wrote the book Intent to Live. It's beautiful. He talks a lot about how when he was younger, he was always attracted to crazy characters because he was feeling crazy himself. And it's so interesting to think of that when you analyze Matthew Perry, because the best Chandler jokes on Friends were the ones that he delivered with a lot of conviction. You almost feel like he's talking about himself. Like my favorite one is the one where he's sitting with Ross in the cafe and he's, dishing out those sarcastic, cruel jokes. And then when Ross comes back at him with another joke, Matthew says, or Chandler says like, I can't dish it out.
They know you're the funny one, then I swoop in with some interesting conversation so they'll see that I'm the brilliant, brooding, sexy one.
I thought I got to make the jokes.
That's funny. So do you think you'll ever work again? What are you doing? You know I can only dish it out.
Because, addicts actually have very thin skin. You cannot take criticism because your whole identity is so fragile. You don't even know yourself. You're constantly escaping from yourself. But someone like Matthew Perry, who's actually a very talented actor and a very talented comedian, is able to mask that idea that he's very sensitive under humor, under this funny, fun-filled character. And speaking of that, by the way, there's this one clip I found on YouTube of Joey and Chandler, or Matthew Perry and Matt LeBlanc, filming the NBC promos. So they're repeating the same line over and over again for different channels. And there's something about it, even though they're both really funny and cute in that clip, there's something about the repetition of it that it's sincere and performative at the same time.
You're watching NBC4. I was loud, wasn't I? You're watching NBC4. You're watching NBC5, Chicago.
Because we all act in our everyday life, right? The trick is to become aware that you're more than the character that you've come to know, the character that comes as a result of all your upbringing, that you're much more than just that. But with celebrities, it's a lot more complicated because the character they play is validated by so many people. And the more famous you are, like on Matthew Perry's level, the more that gets validated, especially because it started so young. I mean, he hit this big fame when he was 24, where your brain is literally still forming. And you have all this unresolved trauma, of course. So this character, this funny, life of the party character that he created, it became his own and it was masking his pain and pushing it down even further. But at some point, this Chandler character that Matthew created actually surpassed him and it was doing things that he wanted to do and couldn't.
I mean, right there you see Chandler overtaking where I was in my life. Marriage and then kids, and I'm, not doing any of that stuff. And
there's this one line that I love from Friends where Chandler tells Monica that they say you're high maintenance, but I love maintaining you, which for a person who just wants someone to save them and rescue them, that line is like, your knees buckle. But it was funny, like, he wished he could have been that person in his real life. Because to be that person, to be that rock for someone else in real life, means you have to be that rock for yourself, a strong foundation for yourself. And Matthew never could be. So that's why I think he struggled with, of course, all this stuff is me projecting my own issues and stuff that I wish for myself. And I do actually love Matthew Perry a lot. So none of this is a criticism. It's just observation and, of course, projecting my own stuff. This is what we do, girl. Yeah, when it comes to love specifically, Matthew Perry was almost acting out in real life the Chandler character that he created, that he's forever this kind of like almost like a teenage boy just longing for a woman who doesn't love him back. And at the end of his memoir, he put, again, those pictures with the captions, the very funny captions. He selects pictures from different girlfriends and different girls. Like there is one where he talks about this co-star that he's posing with her for the camera and they're smiling. He's like, here's me pretending not to be falling in love with this girl. Another one where he's talking about his girlfriend. He's like, oh, here's the only picture where I'm not staring at her. Like, it's almost like he was convinced that he's this little boy who's just loving this woman that's out of his reach. And it really showed up with Jennifer Aniston, one of his co-stars, because when they first started filming, he had a serious crush on her. And again, he spoke about himself as this person who's almost not worthy of that love.
One of your serial crushes, if I may say.
Yeah, I mean,
you really kind of chain crushed.
I did. Well, how can you not have a crush on Jenny?
Yes, you write in the book, I kept wondering, how long can I just look at her?
Yes. I was like, is 3 seconds too long? How long is...
And what struck me also in the memoir and the press tour that he was doing for the memoir and that interview that he did with Dan Sawyer when the memoir was released, he spoke about one point where he decided to turn things around is when his girlfriend pointed out to him how bad he was behaving and how bad his addiction has gotten. It's almost like he quit for her or to please her.
A girlfriend says something that startles him.
I think you're disappearing. And then I went, oh, stop everything. I'm going to rehab right now.
Which again, by the way, anytime you go sober to please someone else or under the pressure from someone else, yeah, I don't know how long that lasts. Eventually you'll relapse. That's why I find these kind of like interventions a bit like when people like almost like gang up on someone and confront them with how messed up they are. I don't know, maybe you guys can leave me a comment like, you know, someone who's benefited from that, but it sounds very... Because to heal yourself, it has to come from within. Sure, maybe friends or loved ones can point out to you stuff, but I don't know about this attacking people and confronting them with the truth. That maybe it will work temporarily, but sooner or later you will relapse to your bad habits, not just alcohol. If you quit any toxic behavior to please someone else, that stuff is not permanent. And that's what ended up happening for Matthew Perry over and over again, because he would quit and relapse, and things got pretty bad for him.
He has been in detox, he estimates, 65 times, and he survived 14 surgeries, once in a coma, on life support.
But even in those rough times, he still managed to find the comedy. There's this one part that really broke my heart when he's talking about, in the book, 14 surgeries. After one of them, he says, like, oh, I finally have rock hard abs, which is like, And the fact that he was able to really keep it together for 10 seasons of filming, that's a lot. That's a testament to his talent and his ability. Like, that should have got him to the right place, but eventually it didn't. But, you know, it's really, there is a lot of like power and intelligence behind him. And also throughout the years, like things where many of his co-stars, like Jennifer Aniston, would point out to him that, oh, we know something is off. Like she would tell him, we can smell it. And at one point they hired him a sobriety coach that would just like, almost like shadow him while they're filming. And even that was like, didn't work because there was one table read that was cut short because he was so incoherent.
The Buddhists have this idea of the hungry ghosts. The hungry ghosts are creatures with large empty bellies and small scrawny necks and tiny little mouths, so they can never get enough. They can never fill this emptiness on the inside. And we all hungry ghosts in this society. We all have this emptiness.
Yeah.
And one other talented actor who struggled with addiction all his life and eventually passed away because of it is Philip Seymour Hoffman, who said this one thing that seared into my brain ever since I heard it. He says, I think I kill pleasure. I take too much of it and make it unpleasurable. There is no pleasure that I have not made myself sick on. And if you struggled with addiction, you know that line will hit hard. It's almost like with binge eating, for example. You just love something, but you just can't stop until you're literally sick because of it. And the more you take, the less clearly you see things. And because a lot of addicts are actually very intelligent and they use their intellect against themselves and their own sensitivity against themselves, they feel ashamed that they're taking so much. So you end up taking more to cover up the shame. And after enough time passes, the damage that you've caused becomes almost, dare I say, irreversible.
By 2018, his worn-down body is about to pay a huge price. All the years and quantities of the pills he was using paralyzed his digestive system.
They put me on a stretcher and they ran me into the emergency trauma room. And it was in there that my colon exploded.
He was in a coma for 14 days.
I woke up and I said, what's happening? What's happening? My mother was in the room and she told me what was going on. And
this was actually the first time he got to see his parents reunited again, ever since the divorce when he was a kid.
They were both standing at the edge of my bed and I was like, whoa, I must be really sick for this to be happening.
And even though he's saying it as a joke, you can tell it's something that he actually missed out on, and it still causes him some pain, like having not grown up in a stable home with parents who have a loving relationship. And this, ladies and gentlemen, and everything in between, is what it always comes down to with addicts. The stuff that you missed out on as a child. And especially if there was no one around to acknowledge that you're missing out on it. So let's dive a little deeper in Matthew Perry's past. His father, John Perry, was an American model and an actor who separated from his mom and left Canada, leaving Matthew there. And by age 10, he started misbehaving and smoking, which is another similarity to the Chandler character, actually.
This is just like my parents' divorce, which is when I started smoking in the first place.
Weren't you 9?
Yeah?
And at age 15, he decided to move to Los Angeles to be with his dad and pursue acting. But I think it's to be with his dad and follow in his dad's footsteps. And by the way, this is not to call out his dad as like this evil person, because parents are always doing the best that they can. But the way the child perceives it when a parent is away is a feeling of abandonment. And this happened like for 15 years. So that kind of emotional wound of being abandoned, feeling emotionally hurt over and over again, is what he grew up with. Like there's this one episode where Ross and Chandler were getting bullied somewhere, and then they come back and they tell the rest of the group what happened. And Ross gets comforted by Rachel, and Chandler literally has no one.
Oh. No. Oh, no, wait a minute. I have no one.
So Matthew, just like his character Chandler, always felt like he had no one. Because the way you perceive it as a child, the world must not want me. If mom or dad don't want me, then there must be something wrong with me. And you kind of like externalize it and start thinking that nobody in the world wants you. Because if your parents wanted you, they would have stuck around. And this is why someone like Matthew Perry pursued fame so intensely. Because when you're famous, then you're gonna always feel wanted. I was actually struck by one part in the book, and also on the press tour for promoting the book. He talked about like praying to God before he got the role of friend to make him famous.
The first time I prayed, and it was the first time, it was like a prayer of like a 14-year-old, and I was 24, something like that. And then I knelt down and said, God, you can do whatever you want to me. Just please make me famous. And 3 weeks later, I got friends, and God didn't forget about the first part of the prayer. What do I want to do to him?
And it's interesting how he talks about it. It was the prayer of a 14-year-old, even though he was 24 years old, because he was actually stuck in being a little boy, emotionally at least. And in the book, he describes how he actually believed that fame would melt his pain away, literally. And this glorification of fame is also evident in how he spoke about his parents. Because when he would speak about his parents, he never spoke about them in the kind of the nurturing aspect. He just spoke about both of them as people who would just walk into the room and just light it up. And in terms of charisma and personality and kind of like that razzle-dazzle rather than nurturing, which is what you need as a child.
His handsome dad is John Bennett Perry, a singer and actor, and once the heartthrob of TV's manliest commercial. His Canadian mother is the captivating, hard-working press secretary to Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau. Glamorous parents, huh?
Yeah, they're both people that take over a room.
And just like his parents, Matthew too had charisma, and his manifested itself in making people, laugh and being kind of like the center and bringing joy to people's lives.
Act natural.
And thanks to that charisma, his prayers to become famous were answered.
And now, the added fear of being on a high wire with about 25 million people watching. He says his terror deepens.
Charisma and fame don't hold you at night. No, girl.
Alone so I could drink. Drinking, therefore alone. I'd drink, watch the movie, pass out, wake up, drink, watch the movie, pass out.
Even though it doesn't look like it, an alcoholic is actually trying to get love. Because it's so interesting. Alcohol is considered a downer, like opiates. Because you have the uppers, right? That give you the hit of dopamine and get you all pumped and excited. But actually the downers, they work on the endorphin system.
Endorphins are our own natural painkillers. But what endorphins also do, they make possible the experience of love.
It's so funny, in the end, Matthew kind of got what he wanted, his dad by his side. There's this last picture that he has with his dad. He's looking so disheveled, and it's haunting for so many reasons because you can feel the love between them. And he also talked in the book how his dad didn't start out, caring for him so much, or not caring in the way that Matthew needed it, but later changed. Because parents are capable of change and they see the effects they have on their children. So there's something kind of heartbreaking. You can tell the dad's still looking proper and trying to save his child, but his child is kind of like a bit helpless. And interestingly, there was also a comment next to that picture on Instagram where someone is thanking Matthew for, saving them and helping them become sober. And this is something that Matthew did for a lot of people.
A guy coming up to me and saying, can you help me stop drinking? And I can say yes and follow up and help the person. And I see the light come on in their eyes.
And what struck me a lot in reading the book is that even though it describes in detail the harrowing ways in which he self-destructed, and they're written very beautifully with a lot of humor, and you are really there, but there's very little mentioned about the recent timeline, about his struggles with addiction. It's almost like they're kept vague, because I think he was probably encouraged by the publisher, most likely, to end on a positive note. But given that what we know happened, there must have been a lot of struggles in recent times. And yeah, because something else was struck me while reading the book is that it feels like it's a letter written from beyond, like someone who's already dying and their life is flashing before their eyes. There was one point where he talks about all the women in his life, how they were flashed before his retina. There is something, especially because I read it now knowing what happened, almost like giving clues, because even that final note where he says ask yourself, what would Batman do? I mean, feels like using humor to deflect and cover up from the fact that there are no concrete steps to help himself, maybe. And speaking of his humor, which he uses expertly, there was one point where he was talking about being awarded for helping alcoholics and raising all this money and lobbying Congress and doing the Perry House, which is when he opened his house for all the alcoholics.
He received an award from the White House,
which is a very surreal thing. We're award-winning alcoholics.
And he was right to say that he would love to be remembered for the work he did for other addicts and addiction in general, telling the world about addiction, because when he opened his home for all these addicts, he was actually saying that society shouldn't judge them. I don't know if you've ever come across people who are high or drunk on the side of the road. People don't like to look at them. Even myself, sometimes I feel like they're such a mirror for how messed up the rest of us are. Because people, when they reach that level, when they're just so high and drunk and living on the side of the road, they stopped pretending. They dropped the mask. And that's very uncomfortable because they mirror us back to us.
So obviously, there are many, many ways to fill this emptiness. But the emptiness always goes back to what we didn't get when we were very small. And we say to the drug addict, how can you possibly do this to yourself? How can you possibly inject this terrible substance into your body that may kill you? Because we actually see that they're just like us, and we don't like that. So we say, you're different from us. You're worse than we are.
And I liked hearing that, obviously.
And I know he spoke a lot about not wanting to be remembered for Friends, but how can you not? You've left such a beautiful legacy of comedy and bringing lightness into people's lives.
I was in London recently, and there were people outside my hotel room, screaming, and I went out and waved to them. I was like Marilyn Monroe or something.
And one of the things that really stayed with me from the book is he describes that there are two kinds of addicts, the ones that want to go up and the ones that want to go down. Meaning that he was one of the ones that want to go down, because he would say he just wants to melt into his sofa and feel wonderful. So wherever he is, I hope he's feeling as wonderful as he wanted and was trying to feel through the drugs and alcohol. Rest in peace. And if you have someone in your life who's struggling with addiction and substance abuse, a big tip is to show compassion. To know that they are actually not trying to be that way. And if they knew any better, they'd get out of it. Because even if people relapse, they're still trying to get better and understand themselves a little better with every relapse. Because sometimes it's very hard to go cold turkey. And if you do go cold turkey, you will end up relapsing. I've relapsed so many times. And the longest I've stayed sober before was a year or 9 months. But with every relapse, I feel like I was learning something new about myself. And this is something that Matthew said in his interview with Diane Sawyer, and one part where he describes the first counselor from his first rehab that he remembers what that counselor told him.
I was walking out and he said, and remember, it's not your fault. And I went, what? And he said, all of this is not your fault. And I went, what are you talking? Say that again.
So guys, this brings us to the end of the video. Sorry, this was a bit on the bittersweet side, but this is what's going on in the world and in my heart, and also the subject of this video. So please like, comment, and subscribe. And I'm gonna leave you with one last bit that I think was very sweet from the interview with Diane Sawyer, and which really sums up his personality.
I know the book is gonna help people.
Okay, we'll do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again tomorrow.
Oh.
Yeah, but ask the same questions.